Nia's hands trembled as the letter from the principal weighed heavily in her grip. The paper felt like it had become a brick in her hand, a physical embodiment of the crushing news she had just heard. Unfortunately, Nia, the school has decided you will not be participating in this year's prom, Principal Roberts said, his voice flat. It's based on unspoken standards that have come into play this year. You know, things just aren't lining up. Nia blinked, her pulse thudding in her ears. She wanted to ask him what he meant by unspoken standards. Was he saying it out loud? Was he really talking about race? She had done everything right. Her grades, her effort, her work ethic, none of that mattered. What does that even mean? She whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. She couldn't believe it. All her years of hard work, of staying under the radar, of doing everything right, and this is how they repay her. Principal Roberts shifted uneasily, but didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, suffocating. Nia's vision blurred. The letter in her hand felt like a cruel joke, a slap to everything she had believed in. She'd earned this. Or so she thought. The words hung in the air long after Principal Roberts had finished. Nia felt them digging into her like needles. As the principal turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the hall, Nia felt every pair of eyes in the room settle on her. The classmates she had walked past in the halls for years were now nothing more than an audience to her humiliation. Some faces twisted with pity, but Nia saw it in their eyes. The discomfort wasn't for her. It was for themselves. They hated seeing someone speak out, hated seeing injustice laid bare. She could hear the soft muttering behind her. A few whispers, too low to make out, but loud enough to remind her. She was alone. One of her old friends, Michaela, caught her gaze and quickly looked away. That was the moment it hit Nia. This wasn't just about prom anymore. This was about a system that had always worked against her. She was a stranger in a place she thought was home, standing in front of people who had seen her struggle but chose to do nothing. The realization made her chest tighten. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the silent approval from everyone around her. Nia felt her fingers curl around the letter, the paper crinkling under the pressure. She wanted to rip it, burn it, throw it in his face. But the anger, like everything else, was complicated. There was betrayal, yes, but there was something deeper than that. A familiar weight in her chest, something that had always been there, something she'd always known but never named until now. The moment the principal had spoken, it all came crashing down. The years of microaggressions, the dismissive comments, the subtle ways she had been pushed to the side. Flashbacks of those moments flooded her mind. When she had been left out of leadership roles, when teachers had forgotten her name, when classmates had questioned if she was really smart enough. Each memory stacked on top of the other, a growing pile of every time she'd been made to feel less than. How could they do this, Atto? She thought. How could they just throw me away like this, after everything? The feeling of being invisible was worse than any outright insult. It was as though her accomplishments, her very existence, had been disregarded. The principal walked out, his footsteps fading into the hallway, leaving Nia behind in a sea of silence. The weight in her chest grew heavier with each second. She stood there, a stone in a river, while the world moved on around her. Her classmates had gone back to their conversations, their laughter, their lives. But she remained stranded. The sympathy from a few peers felt as empty as the silence between her and the principal. Nia looked down at the letter again. The paper felt colder now. The finality of it hit her, even though she hadn't yet processed all of it. The dream of prom, a moment that had seemed so close, now felt impossible. Stripped away without explanation, without care. Her throat tightened, She fought the tears threatening to spill. Get it together, she thought, holding her head high. But every part of her screamed to collapse, to give in to the sorrow and frustration, to just let it all out. Instead, she stayed rooted to the spot, forcing herself to stand tall. This was the moment, the lowest she'd felt, but the beginning of something bigger. She didn't know it yet, but this was where things would change. The world might have turned its back on her, but she wasn't done fighting. Nia's hand hovered over the letter, the one that confirmed she had earned a spot on the prom lineup. She should have felt victorious, but instead, it felt like a promise she couldn't believe. This was supposed to be the culmination of everything she had worked for. Years of late nights, of sacrificing her time and energy for academics, of trying to prove that she belonged. In her mind, the dream was always simple. She wanted to be known for her intellect, her perseverance, and her character, not for the color of her skin. She envisioned walking into that prom, the spotlight on her, celebrated by all. Finally recognized for who she was. But the journey to this moment wasn't easy. Flashbacks to earlier years swirled in her mind. Moments where her hard work was overshadowed by assumptions, by the casual dismissals of her potential. She had always been the other in a school that celebrated the achievements of everyone else. Nia had fought for every inch, but it always felt like she was playing a game that wasn't meant for her. The sting of microaggressions still haunted Nia, long after the words were spoken. She recalled the casual comment in class. "You must have been lucky to get into the advanced classes," as if her placement had nothing to do with her abilities. Or the time a teacher had told her, "You're exceptional for someone like you." A compliment, sure, but tainted by the implication that she was an anomaly. Her classmates weren't much better. "Did you get in because of affirmative action?" one had asked, voice dripping with judgment. Another had commented, "I didn't think you'd be into this kind of thing." The assumption that someone like Nia, someone who didn't fit their narrow mold, couldn't possibly excel in the ways they expected from others, was a constant reminder that she was always an outsider. Each comment, each glance, added another weight to her shoulders. These weren't just small slights. They were pieces of a puzzle that told her she would never truly belong, no matter how hard she tried. Nia knew the atmosphere of her school all too well. The campus, pristine and well-maintained, was a stark contrast to the undercurrent of discomfort that ran beneath it. The students here were wealthy, their families with deep ties to privilege, to success. For them, high school was just another stepping stone in a well-mapped journey, but for Nia, every achievement felt like an uphill battle, one that had to be earned, not given. Diversity existed, but it wasn't celebrated. It was tolerated. People of color were here, yes, but they were rarely at the center of any conversation. Race wasn't discussed openly, but Nia felt its weight every day. The assumption that she didn't belong, that she was an exception, wasn't spoken, but lived in every interaction. It was a silent tension that hovered over her, pressing in from every direction. She didn't need to be reminded that she wasn't like everyone else. That reminder was there every day, in the way people looked at her, in the way opportunities were given to others more easily than to her. Nia wasn't due to adversity. She had learned long ago that the world wasn't going to hand her anything, and that meant she had to build her own strength. The comments, the slights, she had learned to carry them with grace, to turn them into fuel, instead of allowing them to break her. She thought about the few people who had shown her genuine support over the years. Miss Davis, the teacher who had quietly nodded when Nia stayed late to finish her project, or Keisha, the friend who had been there through it all. Those small acts of kindness were the glue that kept Nia's resolve intact. The dream of prom wasn't just about the dance or the recognition. It was about something bigger. It was about showing the world that she could stand tall in a system that had always tried to keep her down. Prom would be a victory, not just for her, but for every moment of prejudice she had faced and overcome. She wasn't done yet. Whatever came next, she would face it head on. Because the world might not have always seen her, but Nia knew her worth, and that was enough to keep moving forward. Nia walked into the prom committee meeting with a sense of purpose, ready to finally be part of the decision-making process. She had worked hard all year, participating in various activities, proving her leadership and creativity. Yet, as she entered the room, the cold reception from Miss Larson hit her immediately. "Glad you could join us, Nia," Miss Larson said with a clipped tone, her eyes not quite meeting Nia's. "Now, let's get started." Nia took a seat and began to share her ideas for the theme. "What if we do a vintage Hollywood look? It could be elegant, but also have a modern twist." Miss Larson glanced at her, then quickly turned to another student. "Maybe someone else should take the lead on this. You know, someone with more experience in event planning," she said, cutting Nia off before she could even finish. Nia's heart sank. It wasn't the first time. Later, as the dress discussion came up, Miss Larson's dismissiveness was even more pointed. "I'm not sure that color suits you, dear," she remarked, looking at Nia's prom dress sketch. "Maybe something more muted would work. Something that's a bit more, appropriate for the occasion." The words stung, leaving Nia feeling small, like her presence didn't matter in this space she was supposed to be part of. Each word from Ms. Larson felt like a quiet rejection, one she had learned to expect but still couldn't shake. Her ideas, her contributions, everything was ignored as though she didn't belong. It wasn't just Miss Larson. Nia had noticed the pattern before. All year, despite her dedication and proven leadership in other areas, she was never given a chance to lead. Group assignments in class, always stuck in the background. Her ideas, though innovative and thought-provoking, were often brushed aside. During a recent group project, Nia had spoken up, suggesting a fresh approach to their presentation. "What if we used a digital format? We could make it more engaging for the class." Her classmates, however, didn't seem to hear her. Instead, they turned to Rachel, the girl who always seemed to fit in perfectly with the rest. Rachel smiled and nodded, then took the floor, claiming the idea as her own. "I like that idea. Let's go with Rachel's suggestion. She's been really proactive," the teacher said, ignoring Nia entirely. The frustration built as Nia realized that no matter how much she put forward, it didn't matter. She wasn't seen as someone who could take charge. Leadership positions were always handed to those who fit the school's mold. And that mold certainly didn't look like Nia. It wasn't just an occasional oversight anymore. It was systemic. A message that no matter how hard she worked, she would always be relegated to the background. One afternoon, Nia walked down the hallway near the teacher's lounge, her mind elsewhere, when she overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear. "I just don't think it would look right, especially with the media attention this year." Miss Lawson's voice was unmistakable, low but sharp, a conversation meant to be hidden. Nia froze as she realized Miss Lawson was talking about her. The words hit her like a slap in the face. "We can't have her representing the school at prom," Miss Lawson continued, completely unaware that Nia was listening. "It wouldn't look good, especially given the attention the school's getting." Nia's stomach twisted in knots. Her first instinct was to walk away, to pretend she hadn't heard the conversation. But she couldn't. It was as if a light had been shone on the truth she had been too afraid to confront. Her exclusion wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. It wasn't about her capabilities or her achievements. It was about how her race might affect the school's image. She stood there, paralyzed by the sting of the words, her mind reeling. This was more than just unfair treatment. It was racial prejudice, hidden behind polite words and public smiles. Nia stood frozen, the words echoing in her mind. All the instances of being overlooked, being disregarded, suddenly clicked into place. It wasn't just about her being unfortunate or misunderstood. This wasn't a matter of bad luck or isolated bias. It was a system that operated with quiet exclusion, making sure that people like Nia were kept out of places where they didn't fit the narrative. She had always suspected something, but now it was clear. Her race was the barrier. No matter how hard she worked, how much she excelled, she was being kept out of spaces where she belonged, simply because the color of her skin didn't fit into their vision of success. This realization settled heavily in her chest. It was a weight she wasn't sure how to carry. But now, more than ever, she knew that this wasn't just about her. This was a much larger issue, one that had been affecting her and others like her for years. She wasn't going to let it define her. Not anymore. The air in the auditorium was electric, charged with the excitement of the upcoming prom. Students whispered and laughed, glancing at each other, eager to see who would make the cut. Miss Larson stood at the podium with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, preparing to announce the nominees for prom court. Nia's palms felt clammy. She could feel the knot in her stomach tightening with every name called. Here we go, she thought. This is it. She had worked so hard, she was a favorite to attend. But as Miss Lawson read off the names, Nia felt her heart race. Rachel Bennett, Miss Lawson's voice rang out. Nia's breath hitched. Her name wasn't next. Tyler Martin. The names went on, but Nia's wasn't one of them. The silence in her mind was deafening as she scanned the room, searching for a look of acknowledgement. A sign that this was just a mistake. But there was nothing. Her name didn't exist on that list. The room began to buzz with whispers, and Nia felt the heat rising in her cheeks. How could this happen? She had been one of the most active, most visible students. And now, she stood in front of her entire school, forgotten. The weight of it crushed her. Miss Lawson's voice cut through the growing murmur of the crowd. Unfortunately, Nia was not nominated due to a lack of proper decorum in her recent actions, she said, her tone smooth, rehearsed, but hollow. Nia froze. The words stung, sharper than any insult she had ever received. She racked her brain, trying to recall any instance where she had acted out of line. Nothing came to mind. She'd always been respectful, always followed the rules. Was this about her race? Was her behavior ever really a concern? Or was this just a convenient excuse to keep her from being part of something she deserved? The crowd shifted uneasily, eyes on Nia as she stood there. Some seemed confused, others indifferent, but all of them were watching, waiting. Nia's chest tightened as she tried to hold back the tears threatening to spill. Anger swelled inside her, but she couldn't let it show. Not here. Not now. The reactions from her classmates were mixed. Some exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what had just happened. Others, however, seemed to approve. Nia noticed a few familiar faces nodding, smiling even, as though Miss Lawson's words had somehow made sense to them. The worst part? Some students were already pulling out their phones, recording the moment. Nia felt her face flush with humiliation as she realized they weren't just witnessing her public rejection. They were documenting it, turning her pain into entertainment. Her heart pounded as the buzz of cameras filled the room. She couldn't escape the feeling of being exposed, vulnerable. This wasn't just an exclusion. It was a spectacle. A moment to be replayed, shared, laughed at. As the flashes continued, Nia's anger grew. How could they stand by and watch this? How could they be so complicit? The quiet approval from some students only made the betrayal feel deeper. This wasn't just about prom anymore. It was about being forced to stand alone in front of everyone, with no one willing to speak up. Nia's hands trembled as the weight of what had just happened settled on her. She had never felt so small. Standing there, in the center of the auditorium, she could feel the tears building up, the raw, angry emotion she had been holding back finally slipping free. She wanted to run. She wanted to escape the eyes of everyone in the room, the whispers, the cruel stares. But she couldn't. The humiliation was too public, too all-encompassing. Every student, every teacher was watching. Her throat tightened as she forced herself to stand still, to hold on to whatever dignity she had left. But it was hard. So hard. The public nature of this betrayal cut deeper than she ever could have imagined. This wasn't just about not being nominated. It was about being publicly rejected in front of an entire school. As if she was somehow not good enough, not worthy of belonging. The spotlight felt more like a spotlight on her shame. As the ceremony continued, Nia wiped the tears from her eyes, her hands trembling. Some of her classmates approached her, offering quiet words of support. A few gave her sympathetic glances, but their voices were small, too small to break through the overwhelming rejection. "I'm sorry, Nia," one of them whispered, but it was almost inaudible, drowned out by the sounds of the others. Across the room, however, Nia could see the stark contrast. A group of students huddled together, laughing and talking. Some of them had even given a small approving nod when Ms. Larson had explained why Nia wasn't nominated. It was clear they were on the side of the status quo, that they were fine with the system as it was. And that made the sting even worse. Those who chose to stand in silence, who didn't challenge the injustice, only reinforced it. The divide between those who saw the injustice and those who accepted it felt like a chasm. One Nia wasn't sure how to bridge. With her chest tight and her mind swirling, Nia turned away from the crowd. She could feel every pair of eyes on her as she walked toward the exit. The room suddenly feeling suffocating. Her legs were shaky, but she forced herself to walk with her head held high, the last ounce of strength pulling her forward. She was leaving the auditorium, leaving the judgment behind, but inside she was crumbling. When she stepped through the doors, the tears came again, but this time they were for herself. She couldn't hold them back. She had fought so hard, believed that maybe, just maybe, she could be part of something bigger, something that recognized her worth. But the truth was undeniable now. This was more than just a prom nomination. It was the reality of being excluded, rejected, and devalued in ways she hadn't imagined. And she knew this fight wasn't over. But for now, it felt like a battle she'd lost. The sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand jolted Nia from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, expecting it to be just another notification, but her heart skipped when she saw the name, Kendall Jackson. The actress, the advocate for racial justice, the woman whose words and actions had inspired Nia for as long as she could remember. Without hesitation, Nia swiped open the message. The words were simple but impactful. "I've been following your story, and I can't stand by and watch this happen. I want to help. I'd be honored to attend prom with you as a statement against the injustice you faced." Nia blinked, the weight of the words sinking in slowly. Could this really be happening? Kendall Jackson, the face of change and activism, was offering to stand beside her. It was too much to comprehend. For a moment, she felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She read the message again, the shock still pulsing through her veins. This wasn't just about prom. It was a statement. Kendall was making it clear that the fight against racism in Nia's school wasn't hers alone anymore. Nia's hands trembled as she read the message again. But this time, her emotions shifted. The fear and doubt that had followed her since that humiliating day seemed to fade in the wake of Kendall's words. This wasn't just an offer to attend prom. It was a bold defiance against the system that had tried to silence Nia. Her name will be beside mine in defiance of the system that excluded her, Nia thought, the significance of Kendall's offer becoming clearer. The actress didn't just want to support her personally. She was publicly challenging the status quo, taking aim at the racism that had tainted every corner of Nia's school life. Nia's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How do you thank someone for changing your life? She wondered. But then, the answer was simple. By accepting. Kendall's endorsement wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had been marginalized, everyone who had been left behind by a broken system. Nia's chest tightened as the weight of the message settled deeper. She stared at the screen in disbelief, her mind racing. Kendall Jackson, someone she'd admired from afar for years, now stood firmly in her corner. The disbelief gave way to something else. A spark of hope she hadn't felt in months. She had been so sure her fight was a solitary one. But this was different. She wasn't just another face in a crowd. Kendall had seen her. Kendall had heard her. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard, unsure of how to express the mix of emotions flooding her. I've got to say something, she muttered to herself. After a moment, she typed, "Thank you. This means more than you know. I won't let you down." Nia's breath caught as she hit send, realizing that this was the turning point she had been waiting for. It wasn't just a text. It was a powerful gesture of solidarity, one that had transformed everything in an instant. Within minutes of posting Kendall's message, Nia's phone exploded with notifications. The post quickly garnered thousands of likes, comments, and shares, spreading like wildfire. Friends, classmates, and even strangers from around the world weighed in with their support, their words flooding the comment section. "This is how change happens," one comment read. "Nia, you're not alone." The post caught fire, spreading across platforms. People from all walks of life offered messages of solidarity, some sharing their own experiences with injustice. It wasn't just about Nia anymore. It was about amplifying her voice and challenging the systems that allowed discrimination to persist. For the first time since the prom announcement, Nia felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She wasn't standing alone. The injustice she had faced was now part of a larger conversation, one that couldn't be ignored. When Nia walked into school the next day, the atmosphere was electric, different. She could feel the shift in the air, the way people were looking at her. The whispers were still there, but now they carried a different tone. There were no longer snickers or sidelong glances. Instead, there were nods of respect, quiet admiration. "Hey, Nia," one of her classmates called out. "What you're doing, it's powerful." Others, who had once stayed silent, now seemed to speak up, openly questioning the actions of those who had supported Ms. Lawson's decision. Even the teachers seemed to feel it. Their glances toward Nia were more cautious now, as if they too were starting to recognize that something had changed. Ms. Lawson, once so confident in her role in the exclusion, walked by Nia in the hallway, her posture stiffer, her gaze diverted. The power dynamics had shifted, and it was clear that Nia was no longer an outcast. Kendall's message had ignited something bigger than either of them could have imagined. Nia realized, with growing clarity, that the fight was just beginning. But she no longer had to fight it alone. The night was filled with the soft hum of music and laughter, but everything changed the moment Kendall and Nia stepped through the doors. The buzz that had been building all evening turned into an immediate frenzy. Flashbulbs popped, reporters scrambled to catch the moment, and students froze in their tracks. There they were, Nia, standing confidently beside Kendall Jackson. The contrast was stark. Nia, who had once been silenced, now walked into the spotlight, her every step fueled by the support of a woman she had only admired from afar. Kendall, the actress and advocate who had once spoken about justice, was now standing with Nia in a gesture that said more than words ever could. The media erupted, cameras capturing the duo's arrival. It was clear, this wasn't just about prom anymore. The presence of Kendall Jackson, someone with a platform, had amplified Nia's fight, turning a school event into a moment of defiance. Students murmured, some in awe, others in disbelief. Nia could feel the weight of their stares. But this time, it wasn't disdain. It was respect, or at least a flicker of it. She walked through the ballroom, her heart pounding. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was strength. The impact of Nia and Kendall's arrival was felt immediately. The news of their entrance spread quickly. The story making its rounds on social media, igniting conversations about race and injustice. Nia's face, once hidden in shame, was now plastered across headlines. The backlash against the school intensified, with online discussions focused on the systemic racism that had led to Nia's exclusion. Miss Lawson, who had once held all the power, now found herself scrambling. She had underestimated the ripple effect of Kendall Jackson's involvement. The phone calls and emails poured in, some expressing support for Nia, others calling for action against the school's discriminatory practices. At a hastily called press conference, Miss Lawson and the principal stood in front of the cameras. The tension was palpable. The principal cleared his throat, reading from a prepared statement, acknowledging the mistakes made, but offering no real explanation or apology for the underlying issues. It was clear. The school was cornered. The pressure was mounting, and Nia's fight was no longer just her own. The public had picked up the banner, and now it was too loud to ignore. The apology came as expected, a scripted attempt to save face. The principal read from the statement, his voice stiff, lacking any real emotion. "We acknowledge the mistakes made and the hurt caused," he said. But Nia knew better than to believe the hollow words. She stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching as the apology fell flat. Miss Lawson, who had orchestrated so much of the exclusion, stood beside him, offering nothing but a robotic nod. There was no real accountability in their words. No mention of the systemic issues or any plan for change. Nia's gaze remained fixed on them, the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. She knew this apology wouldn't fix anything. It couldn't undo the years of subtle discrimination, the endless dismissals. But it was a start, just not the kind that would make her feel better. The media picked up on the lackluster apology, and the public's response was swift. Outrage flooded social media, where people criticized the school's attempt to avoid true responsibility. This wasn't enough. It was Nia's turn now. She stepped up to the podium, Kendall standing firmly by her side. The room, once filled with the hum of chatter, fell into complete silence. The air seemed to thicken as Nia stood tall, ready to make her voice heard in a way she never had before. With calm authority, Nia began. She spoke of the everyday racism that had punctuated her school years, the microaggressions that had worn her down, the systems that had worked tirelessly to keep her in her place. "But this," she said, her voice steady, "this isn't just my fight. This is all of us together. This is about standing up against a system that has made it too easy to ignore the voices of those who don't fit the mold." Her words carried weight, each sentence a powerful call to action. "We cannot allow this to continue." Nia said, her eyes sweeping the room, now filled with rapt attention. Racism is not just an individual issue. It's systemic. And we have the power to change it, if we stand together. Her speech ignited something deep within those who had once stayed silent. The students who had quietly supported the status quo were now questioning their own complicity. Nia's words were more than a speech. They were a declaration of power, of agency, and of hope. The video of Nia's speech went viral within hours. Shared by students, activists, and media outlets alike, it quickly became a symbol of resistance and empowerment. The comment sections flooded with messages, some applauding Nia for her bravery, others calling for more systemic change. People from around the world weighed in, sharing their own experiences with exclusion and racism, amplifying the conversation that Nia had ignited. In the halls of the school, things had changed. Students began discussing race in ways they never had before. Conversations that had once felt uncomfortable were now happening openly. Some students admitted their privilege. Others acknowledged the biases they had never questioned. But the real shift was in the atmosphere. Nia's story had shifted the narrative from one of victimhood to one of empowerment. The viral aftermath wasn't just about views and shares. It was about creating a platform for change, and Nia had provided that platform. The ripple effects of Nia's speech were swift. The school, once confident in its ability to sweep the issue under the rug, now found itself at the center of a public storm. Pressure from the media, parents, and the wider community forced them to confront their deep-seated issues. Ms. Lawson, who had once felt untouchable, was placed on administrative leave as investigations into her role in the exclusion process began. The principal, too, faced mounting criticism for his handling of the situation. Changes were promised. The school pledged to implement diversity training, revise their policies, and address the systemic issues that had been allowed to fester for so long. But Nia knew the road ahead would be long. Real change required more than just a few adjustments. It required a cultural shift. For Nia, though, it wasn't about the apology or the changes. It was about reclaiming her dignity and the dignity of others who had been silenced for far too long. She walked away from that night knowing that, no matter what happened next, she had made a difference. The fight wasn't over, but she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Think about the times you faced discrimination, in school, at work, or in your daily life. How did it make you feel? How did you react? Take a moment to think about your own story. This moment, where Nia's journey intersects with your own, isn't just about what happened to her. It's about what we all experience, whether we realize it or not. The sting of being dismissed, ignored, or judged based on something you can't change. Reflect on that. How did it shape you? Did you stay silent, or did you speak up? If you were in Nia's position, how would you have reacted? What steps do you think should be taken to challenge systemic racism in places like schools or workplaces? Imagine yourself walking in her shoes, facing the kind of rejection, the weight of racial prejudice she dealt with day after day. Would you stay quiet, or would you stand up like Nia did? What would you do to bring about real change? It's easy to sit back and watch, but real transformation starts with action. If you ever experienced or witnessed injustice, what do you think needs to happen for things to change? We have a responsibility, not just to reflect, but to actively engage. What steps would you take to make sure no one else has to experience what Nia did? The story isn't just Nia's, it's all of ours. Let's change the narrative, one story at a time. Share, like, and subscribe for more. Together, we can rewrite the story, one person's voice, one collective effort, and we can create a space where no one is silenced. Nia's fight is a reminder that we all have a part to play. Don't just watch the change, be a part of it. Share this message, engage in the conversation, and let's start the journey towards a more inclusive and just world.